Annyeong, ni hao. Hello, I am the Dark Fae, and today in this video I wanted to kind of introduce a new series about writing and world building. Fantasy and writing have always been a very big part of my life. Like growing up, I did a lot of reading, like with series like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and like Redwall. And I wanted to kind of share that passion with you guys, and what better way than through a YouTube video. So a little bit of background on like me as a writer, or my history with writing, I guess. I think I first started writing in, I want to say, the 4th grade. At least that's kind of the earliest story I can remember, which was about like a girl who finds some magical doorway into like a fairy realm, and there might have been like a unicorn involved. Very different than what I write now, but I was 9. And then the year after, in 5th grade, I also remember a story where there were these 2 sisters. I think they might have been twins, but I think they were just sisters. They like venture out into the forest, and then one of them gets like murdered with a diamond dagger. And yes, this was 5th grade. And so like the diamond dagger ended up like framing another dude who was like a detective, or he was like the diamond guy, I don't know. But then it turned out the actual murderer was like this giant like flying serpent in disguise, who wanted the other sister to be like his queen or something, and then I think she ended up turning into a giant flying serpent as well. Or maybe, I think so, because I very clearly remember an illustration of 2 giant flying serpents, so that must be somewhere. But anyways, and then there was like another story the year after that where this girl finds like a magic stone that gives her magical powers, and then some guy wants to like use her powers for evil. Pretty sure his name was something really unimaginative, like death something. It was death something, I think. But those are like a lot of like the stories that came out of my imagination as a kid. Maybe a little bit messed up, I don't know, but who's to judge? And then in 8th grade was when I like for some reason decided that I was going to write a novel. And I kind of did. I finished it I think in between my freshman and sophomore year of high school, so I was like 14, I want to say. And it was not great, of course, as all first novels written by teenagers are. It was like some love story between like a vampire and a werewolf, and they had like a bigger conflict with like these shapeshifters who had a hand in like their past life, stuff like that. And I think I finished a sequel to that one, but I never really did anything with them. It was just kind of like my beginning of my, like the beginnings of like my novel writing, I guess. For me, I always get pulled with like a lot of different ideas, and then I'll kind of like start them and then stop them as like other ideas suddenly pop up and I want to investigate those. And then when I actually wrote the first like I'm not published, but like the first novel that I was actually like really proud of, that was in my freshman year of college. It started off as kind of part of our core writing class. We had to make a graphic novel and use elements of like imperialism and racism and like anti-heroes and stuff like that. And so out of that graphic novel, I made a book. And I actually self-published that book, and I actually have it here. It's called The Executioner, and I self-published it on like CreateSpace/Amazon, so it is like an actual book. I forgot how cool this was, because I always think it's self-published, it doesn't really like count, you know? But it is really cool to be able to hold like a book and say that I wrote this. And I also designed the cover. This is what the back looks like. It is available on Amazon. I guess I'll link it in the description below if you're interested. It's available as a paperback and on Kindle. But this was kind of about a genetically engineered... Oh, quick switch. This is about a genetically engineered executioner who is part of like the ruling class. The world's divided into like two different sections, like the districts and the Dominion. And the Dominion are like kind of like the lower class, the people who they're almost like peasant-like. They're like put to work in very harsh conditions. And then the districts are like very rich. They don't really have to worry about money or anything like that. And they kind of go to the executions as a way of like entertainment, very like gladiator, Hunger Games-esque. So basically she, the main character, her name is Siren Evitro. She kind of ends up having a change of heart and starts to rebel against the districts and like the king because of another executioner whom she thinks she's in love with. Very not a great synopsis, but it's been a while since I've gone through this story. So I wrote this in 2011, like 2012, I think is when I finished it. I published it self-published it in 2016. So that's that. And then I also wrote a sequel to it that's not quite finished yet. But I had a lot of fun like making this world and making these characters, and I kind of want to share like what that was like and kind of my thoughts and experiences with how I did it, and like what my thought process is, I guess. And then I'm also currently working on like a few different stories. One of them I actually have finished, and I was trying to get published, and then I kind of stopped after being a little discouraged, but I should get back into it. But ghost story about like an exorcist who is dealing with like the inner guilt of being a murderer, because she killed someone by accident, and now that person is like haunting her or possessing her. And so she kind of live with that daily reminder. And then another story that's like very full of like different classes of mage who have to go through a trial at their coming of age kind of thing. So a lot of different stories that come up with, and each one kind of has its own different flair and its own different world and themes. And then I'm also like currently starting to run a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. So I'm gonna like be the dungeon master. And I've done like a couple of one-shots before, but nothing like an actual campaign. So I, instead of like doing a pre-run or pre-generated campaign or world, I'm doing my own world, which I made up pretty much from scratch. There are of course some elements of Dungeons and Dragons in it, but for the most part it's pretty much mine. Yeah, that's kind of cool to say. So anyways, what I wanted to talk about in this video with like writing and world building, whether it's in like a writing setting, or maybe it's in like a more interactive like Dungeons and Dragons setting, or even in like maybe an art setting, anything like that. So this video is mostly just about kind of getting started, because I feel like projects like these, like writing a book or making a D&D campaign, making a world, is very daunting, and a lot of people I think will tend to kind of give up before they even try, just because it's like there's just so much involved, you know. So really what you want to do is you want to start small. Start with like just one thing, start with an idea, start with a character, start with a theme, and then build up from there. Like I definitely didn't create an entire continent in an hour. I didn't make a whole world in a day. It takes time, and of course you're always going to be adding, you're always going to be changing, deleting, editing. Like a world, I feel, is always a work in progress. There's always things that you think of that could be really cool. There's always things that you think of that are really cool, but maybe they don't fit. Maybe they belong in a different world under a different system, kind of like that. So something that I do, like kind of naturally, I guess something that happens to me a lot is when I'm watching TV or reading a book or watching a movie or even like an anime, playing a game, anything that has kind of like the elements that I'm interested in, like fantasy, magic, any kind of like fictional thing, because that's what I like to write about. Those tend to give me these like random ideas, like, oh, this could be really cool. Like if this happened, then what if the story went this way? And that'll kind of turn into a story idea that I can then build around and play with. For example, let's see, I'll use my D&D world as an example for right now because that's what I've been focusing on. It's kind of why I haven't posted anything in a little bit. The theme that I really wanted to go with was dark fantasy because it's one of my favorite things. So the idea that I kind of took from was Dark Souls. So Dark Souls is a very like dark fantasy horror kind of awe-inspiring game that is like you have one central location and then that kind of like takes you to all of these other different locations that are linked in certain ways. And I kind of wanted to make something like that for my campaign. So I started with a center area, and then I slowly kind of built out all of these different sections with different themes. Like one is an undead theme, one of them is kind of like a wild uninhabited place with like these cannibalistic creatures. One of them is like this kind of abyssal area with like lakes of blood with like terrible monstrosities and stuff like that. So you kind of take an idea and just shape it slowly and piece by piece instead of thinking, oh god, I gotta create a whole continent for these people. What do I do? Where does everything go? Like, how do I put together a map and how do I like figure out all of the cities? Like, don't worry about that. Just figure out, okay, these are my main places and what they're about, and maybe the most like who is in charge or like what is kind of driving that area. So then like I have a lot of practice, I guess, or I don't want to say that like these ideas just kind of come naturally to me, but they kind of just like pop up, I think, because I try to like expose myself to a lot of the things that I'm interested in. But and then not all ideas are necessarily like enough for a full story or a full world. There are definitely like tons of story ideas that I've like started and written like a paragraph or a page or two and then just like never visited again, because at the time like there wasn't enough there for me. But it's a kind of a good habit or a good exercise to like kind of come up with a lot of different ideas and kind of see what you like. So today's kind of writing or creation challenge is to come up with just five ideas or themes for stories or worlds, I guess. So for example, with my Dungeons and Dragons room, the theme was dark fantasy horror Dark Souls, the game. So you come up with 5 of those, and then from there you can kind of start to build a world, which is kind of what I'll get into in subsequent videos. But the main part of it first is to come up with an idea that you can stick to, that you like, and that really kind of like interests you, like it really like speaks to you, like you want to make this a reality. Because if it's kind of an idea that you aren't really sure about or you don't really like, it's going to end up kind of like half-assed. Not a great way to put it, but like it's hard to put all of this detail into something that you're not passionate about. So I can give you some examples of like themes, I guess, kind of like with my D&D campaign, it was Dark Souls, Dark Fantasy. I had another story, what if life was a game of tag? Like with my Executioner story, the idea from this was kind of a topsy-turvy world where a like well-off and important person rebels against like a life of luxury in order to help the poor, and that, or the poor or less fortunate, I should say. So that's 2, 3, I guess, technically, if you count the D&D one. Let's say I can use some of the ones from my past. So like a girl finds a magic stone, gets magical powers. And then the last one, let's say you have an idea for an assassin who doesn't quite belong in the organization that they're in, maybe because of race, maybe because of where they came from, maybe because of reasons that they don't even know. So coming up with a bunch of ideas like that and then finding one that you really like is really important, and it's a good way to kind of not be overwhelmed with creating an entire world, an entire like setting where, if you think about it, there's so much that goes into it. Just starting off with like a small idea and like slowly branching out from there will be a lot easier. So there's your writing Arcation challenge for the day, the week, this video. And I will be back with more videos on like how to expand on that and like what kind of the next steps or like other approaches are. So yeah, thank you for watching. I hope this was interesting. I hope that it was helpful and maybe can inspire you to start like a new project. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a full-length novel, a whole campaign, anything like that. It could just be like a short story. It could just be like a piece of artwork. It could be something just very contained. So don't be too scared of the great big recesses of your imagination. Yeah, I hope this was not terrible to watch, and thank you so much for sticking it out to the end, and I will be back with these. I'll try to kind of give each one a theme or its own kind of subject. I think this one I rambled a little bit, but thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!